Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. And thank you especially to the people who make this show possible for you every single day with their support at patreon.com/SW7x7. All right, we are here to talk about Destiny, which is episode 3 of the Acolyte, and we will be doing our 7 takeaway breakdown situation. This time, our first takeaway is not a rundown of the entirety of the episode, but is actually about the timeline. It's about when this episode takes place. And in a way, it's kind of surprising because we've been given the idea that the layers of this show are going to unfold until we finally get to a certain level of truth, if you will. And yet, we started out with the first 2 episodes by getting the idea that there is this, big mystery at the heart of it, whatever happened on Brendok 16 years ago. Well, we get the story of what happened on Brendok 16 years ago in this episode, at least from a certain point of view. This is the story of the 8-year-old twins, May and Osha, who are on the eve of their ascension ceremony where they are to become fully vested witches in this coven that is led by Mother Anastasia, who is both literally and figuratively their mother, and Mother Coral, of course, who is also literally and figuratively their mother. And as I was saying that, I was thinking of it in terms of the leadership aspect of things, like the figurative mothers of the Coven of Witches, but also there is the literal aspect of the creation of the twins and the carrying of the twins until they were born. And that actually leads into the second takeaway, which is that for as many questions as this episode actually answers, it also manages to raise a lot more. Like, who are these Force Witches and where did they come from that they were being particularly persecuted? Why is it that their powers are being described as dark and unnatural when even though we see the possession of a young Padawan, Torben, all we're seeing is something that looks like self-defense at this point. We also don't know how it is that the Jedi found them, why they seemed to have been looking for them. We don't know how the 2 daughters were conceived, although there is a suggestion that perhaps there's some ritual that happened to cause their creation, which immediately puts you in mind of Anakin Skywalker not having a father. And then by the end of the episode, we find out that, of course, May survives the events of the episode, but she seems to be utterly left alone on the planet. And so how does she manage to survive until we see her in the current day events of the Acolyte? So very well done episode overall, in the sense that it answered some of the questions at the heart of the series, and yet it also raised additional questions that are definitely significant for how this will all turn out. For a third takeaway, it's kind of an interesting twist that we are given with how May and Osha come at this particular situation. I think we're used to the idea that rejecting a family that loves you is often sided with the dark side, if you will, whereas wanting to maintain and keep a family together is leaning toward the light side of things. And that's not what's happening in this particular situation. But it's probably unfair to characterize that in such a very general fashion. Ultimately, Osha is, of course, the one leaning to the light side of the Force, or the light side of the thread, if you will, whereas May is leaning toward the dark side of it. But it's Osha's ambition for more, like there must be more than this provincial life, that is causing problem. And May, on the other hand, who loves her sister deeply and wants to maintain a strong relationship with her, is also showing some very sociopathic tendencies with the fire setting and the animal cruelty. So ultimately, the episode is kind of turning some of the typical Star Wars tropes on its head a little bit. And in a similar fashion, it's also kind of leaning hard into one of the things that gets discussed by fans from time to time, and that is our fourth takeaway, and that has to do with the Jedi wanting to test the children. For pretty much the entirety of Star Wars storytelling, it has been just depicted as normal that the Jedi are finding Force-sensitive children and are bringing them to the Jedi Temple and taking them away from their families or not. But there have long been conversations about how in real life, if we were actually thinking about this, this is a very odd practice. And we are given a situation where it has that sense of oddness. It has that sense of, this isn't quite right. When Master Indara is saying, we have a right to test these children. I mean, whose right is this? Like, how can she possibly say that? And then it genuinely feels creepy when Mother Anastasia agrees to let them test Osha, and Saul chimes in and says, both girls. And you're like, oh, no, this is wrong. For a fifth takeaway, we have the story of what went down, at least from a certain point of view. And it is very similar to the story that Saul has been telling us about how things went down. It's that May started a fire and it destroyed everything, and he wanted to save the both of them. And gotta say that from a certain point of view, that does seem to be accurate, right? May did start a fire to prevent Osha from leaving, so there's that. And it does look like Saul was coming to save both Osha and May. The way that that scene unfolded with the two parts of the bridge falling and both May and Osha falling, where Saul was only able to save Osha, that really does feel like it was a legitimate, honest thing that he wanted to save them both and was only able to save Osha. But the rest of it being it destroyed everything, well, yeah, about that. You know, with all of the members of the Coven laying dead in their fortress, yeah, it doesn't look like it was due to fire or crumbling walls or anything like that. It's kind of odd, unless they just suddenly all passed out from, smoke exposure and died that way. Yeah, I don't think that's how it unfolded. And I think that's one of the other central mysteries that has yet to be revealed. For a sixth takeaway, even though the story that we were told, as I was just describing in the last takeaway, lines up with the way that Saul has been telling us the story in the previous two episodes, it really is actually Osha's point of view that we're seeing this episode from. Osha is the only character that we see throughout the entirety of the episode, with the exception, of course, of that last little coda where we see May and realize that she survived. But yeah, otherwise, the entire episode is told basically with Osha present, and so we can presume it is what Osha knows and believes. And she knows May started a fire, and she saw all the dead bodies, but she doesn't know why they died or how they died. And even, May's situation, when she sees May, she says, "Where's Mama?" And May says, "Mama's dead." And Osha says, "What did you do?" And May responds with, "What did you do?" So yeah, it's definitely, I've seen suggestions that May is claiming that she killed her mother, but that's absolutely not what's happening here. And for last takeaway, this is usually the place for our fun fact situation, but it probably did not escape your notice that instead of having two opposing terms as the title of our episode, Lost Found and Revenge Justice, this time we have just the single word destiny as the title of the episode. It's kind of emblematic of how Osha and May's situation is tied together, that I give you you and you give me kind of twin connection that they have. And we find out actually that whereas we thought Mother Anastasia was talking to May in one of the trailers where she was saying, if you want to pull the thread, then pull it, she's actually talking to young Osha in this particular case. And this Coven of Force, which is in their ideas about destiny and the thread as opposed to the Force, we're going to talk about that in our deeper dive episode tomorrow. So yeah, but there's definitely something fascinating going on here with the way that the idea of the Force or something related to the Force is being discussed by this other particular religion, and yet there's also some stuff that seems to conflict in the way that various members of the Coven are presenting it. So yeah, we'll dig into all of that tomorrow. But that means that we are done with our brief breakdown, our 7 takeaway breakdown of the events of Destiny, which is episode 3 of The Acolyte, and that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. If you enjoy the show, I hope you will consider sharing this show with people who might also enjoy a daily dose of Star Wars joy like this, you can do that by just telling people. You can do that by leaving ratings and reviews for other people to find. You can do that by telling algorithms that this show is worth sharing with other people through your likes and your comments and your subscribes and your follows and joins. And you can even help me produce this daily dose of Star Wars joy. And it doesn't cost more than a cup of coffee or so a month. And you can do that at patreon.com/SW7X7. And thank you for considering it. And it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast, as always. And may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.